start to, yeah. Streaming to YouTube. Okay, you.
I'm sorry. I was checking the share screen, and for some reason it's collapsed.
Hi, Marina. Hi, Saba. Hi, Walter.
Hi, everyone.
$20.
Charalambos, do you think it's time to start or?
All right. Friends from around the world, good evening. My name is Charalambos Vrasidas, Professor of Learning Innovations and Policy at the University of Nicosia, Director of Quartet, and also Editor-in-Chief of Education and Media International, the ICEM Scholarly Journal. I will be the moderator of the presentation tonight with title Education in Times of Uncertainty, Pedagogy, Technology, and Culture. This is one of 5 presentations that takes place as part of this series. ICEM, in association with the Polytechnic Institute of Santarém School of Education in Portugal, is very happy to offer this seminar And the Institute in Santarém, the School of Education, has invited 5 outstanding speakers to share with us current topics of education and technology. It has been ICEM's tradition to offer an annual conference in selected country every year. But unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, the on-site conference was not possible. Therefore, we are offering this educational experience online, and we hope that you will all benefit from. We would like to thank each one of the speakers who have graciously agreed to share their knowledge with you. Today, we have the honor to introduce António Diaz de Figueiredo, who is an emeritus professor of information systems at the Faculty of Science and Technology of the University of Coimbra in Portugal, and a senior researcher of its Center for Informatics and Systems. He will be discussing education in times of uncertainty, pedagogy, technology, and culture. His presentation will be for approximately 40 minutes, and at the end, the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions. We kindly ask that you enter your questions in the chat box so that Professor will be able to view them and address them. And the questions will be answered in a sequential order until the time is allocated and given the time we have. Thank you all for participating, and thank you to the Polytechnic Institute of Santarém School of Education in Portugal for organizing this wonderful event. Professor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to have Charalambos taking care of me and asking difficult questions. I'm going to use some slides for my presentation, so I will start right. Well, I will not start yet because I seem to be disabled. Could someone give me the screen sharing rights? Screen sharing has been disabled. Can you check that?
And now you will need to make Professor as a co-host so he can present.
Here I am now. Are you getting it? Okay. So this is the title of my presentation. Are you all seeing it?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
And my message is that my main message is that the challenges facing education in this coming decades are radically different from those of the past. Some people talk and have been talking for some time about the so-called risk society, and a prominent sociologist, Ulrich Beck, wrote a book about it, The Risk Society. And this is really a concern that has been growing since the early 80s. So we all live in a risk society, and this risk is increasing because of what we are doing to our planet. We live in the Anthropocene. We are living in climate crisis, degradation of the environment, capitalism, wild capitalism, globalization. So we have a lot of reasons to be concerned about the world we live in and about the uncertainty that characterizes this world. This points to, first of all, to one thing. If we are thinking about the schools, that's the skills that are needed in a world which is which we don't know which is uncertain. Autonomy, leadership, curiosity, initiative are a lot of skills that we are not cultivating strongly enough in our schools, and that are suggested by this kind of world, the risk world we live in. So the big question is, how are we to prepare the new generations for this world of cultural change, of disruption, of uncertainty, of complexity, of non-determinism. We don't know how to prepare them. No one has an idea of what the next decades will be like. In the old days, we could approach someone, who knew about it all. Now, there's no one who knows how it's going to be. So what does this mean? This means that the new generations must be prepared to build their own roadmaps. We will not be able to tell them anything because they must build their own solutions, and they must find out about the problems, because some of the problems they will have, we don't even know about them at the moment. So they must do it with autonomy, with a lot of autonomy, determination, and imagination. They must be autonomous, empowered, proactive, and we must teach them to be like that.
Professor, I'm
Yes?
sorry to interrupt you.
Yes?
I don't know if you are using slides and they are sliding, but we are not seeing it on the screen. We are still seeing the title one.
That's strange.
Maybe stop the sharing and sharing again.
I'm going.
If you use two monitors, you need to choose the right screen that is flipping.
I'm using two monitors, yes.
Maybe that's the reason.
Let me just stop there now and pause share.
Okay, now we're seeing the slide.
You are seeing it?
Yeah, we
Yes.
see the slide that reads, it is in this world that they will have to.
Okay. Should I quickly go through it? I think.
Yes, continue. You don't need, yes.
Okay. Resume share. Is it okay now?
It is. I mean, we are still seeing the black slide with the white letters. It is in this world.
And now?
The same.
Oh, something is not working here. Let me. What about now?
We see the one that says they must be autonomous.
Empowered, proactive.
Proactive?
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes very
You
fast.
can see change. Yeah.
Ah, okay. So it's, as you said, Gerald, it's in the other screen. So I'll turn to the other screen. So that's what I said. I'm going to pass quickly. The challenges are radically different. The risk society, the challenges, the missing skills. Are you getting it now?
We can see it.
So the difficulty is how are we going to prepare them for this world? No one has any idea about it. So they must be autonomous, empowered, proactive. It is in this world that they must integrate, differentiate, and thrive. How should we educate them? What technology, what cultural context should we provide, and what pedagogies should we use? And that was a kind of introduction. I'm going to talk about these three topics: the digital transformation, the cultural transformation, and the pedagogical transformation. And then I'll make some conclusions in the end. Beginning with the digital transformation. We live in an era of digital transformation. What is digital transformation? Digital transformation is this more powerful and generalized computation, the speeds of communication, the explosive variety of technical systems, the social complexity, the growing risk. This is the digital transformation. And the challenge is to prepare these new generations to the digital transformations. So how should the schools prepare the young generations for this transformation? What citizens should the schools develop? Should just they develop expert digital technologists, or should they develop a rich diversity of citizens, ethically cultivated, capable of facing the social challenges of our time? Should they concentrate on the key ingredients of the technological discourse, that is effectiveness, efficiency, and competition? Or should they also care for human values, for collaboration, for solidarity, for empathy? So that's a choice we have to make when we decide what we are going to teach. Should we prepare people to work as technicians, or should we also prepare them? Should it be more technological, or should it be more human, or can it be both? Let's just pick up some reflections about the topic of digital transformation. We usually have a look at the bright side, but there are dark sides about digital transformation. Most of the decisions
You are muted, Professor.
I've been muted again. Okay. You getting me?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Most of the decisions of our times are made by algorithms. This is one of the books that was published recently to point out dangers we all risk because of the automation carried out by algorithms. We are automating inequality, and no one knows how those algorithms are trained, and we don't know the interests and criteria behind the data collection. This is another book about the same type, about the same concerns. Now, we cannot educate moral scientists and technologists to serve immoral masters. We must develop citizens that are culturally prepared to give sense to the world. And these citizens must be able to counteract the ills of technological abuse and the indifference. So we have this challenge. On one hand, we have the bright side of technology, but we also have the dark side of technology. There are also serious problems about ethics came up recently for instance, from Google and from Facebook. And that shows us that we cannot develop people who are just technical people, because if we devote our schools to just develop technical people, they will be working alongside these challenges of ethical difficulties. I'm having trouble with that. Oh, again. So we cannot educate technologists who are indifferent to ethics, to human values, and to the social complexity of this world. Now, to prepare this new generation for a world of digital transformation, how can we do? We need to, and that's one of my points, we need decisive human transformation. Not a digital transformation of the school, but a cultural transformation of the school and a pedagogical transformation of the school. A transformation that, of course, takes technology into account, but that goes far beyond technology to correct the dangers of a technology that has no soul. And they must be able to build a better world. So that's the main concerns, I think I should point out about the digital transformation. There's a digital transformation out there. It's happening. It's going on ever faster and faster. But we should not just prepare the young people to work for this transformation. We must also prepare to work against the evils of this transformation. Now, about the cultural transformation. This is a book by the old Jerome Bruner, The Culture of Education. He pointed out very insightfully that education is everything about culture. Education is not a technique for teaching people. Education is a cultural phenomenon. It's is a form of educating people by learning, by teaching them to belong to a culture. So that's the challenge of education, is to educate people to belong to a culture. On people, on Lewis Mumford, he was an historian who wrote in 1934 that book, Techniques and Civilization, and he analyzed the relationships between developing techniques and developing civilization. And he found out a lot of interesting issues. And one of them is that people do not learn genuinely about technology by playing around with technology in context that they are just playing with technology. From an anthropological point of view, usually the instrumental approaches to learning technologies are superficial. And we have one example, our cave-dwelling ancestors who lived in the cages and used those sticks and stones and those things. They had those weapons and those tools. And they did not become civilized. Why they only played with the tools. They only became civilized when they were able to incorporate those tools in cultural practice. And this was, as we know, the cultural practice of agriculture. So our ancestors only became civilized when, in spite of having tools, they only became civilized when those tools were incorporated in a whole culture, the culture in that case of agriculture. It's again sliding. My claim is that our children will likewise remain culturally and technologically inadequate if we insist on training them just for the instrumental uses of technology. But that's what we have been doing in the last 40 years. So what I claim is that we should help them incorporate the use of technologies in everyday practice, in everyday cultural practices, both inside and outside the school. And I'm responsible for that because I created a project, Computers in Schools project in Portugal. But I now realize that 40 years since we have been using technologies in schools, we have never been able to get beyond the instrumental phase of the uses. We have never been able to generate a true culture of appropriation of technologies by the schools. I think we should change this, and my proposals are to change this. Now, how can we introduce a cultural transformation for the digital age? So that's one of my concerns. And my answer, which is very provocative, is that number one, we must generalize the regular use of smartphone in the schools every day in all subjects and projects. And the second one is by developing the skills of the teachers for technology supported new generation pedagogies. And I'll get into that a little later. Let's discuss a bit about the smartphone. The smartphone, in my opinion, is now the most powerful personal link that ever existed between the human beings and the world. In the last 2 years, they have changed very much. I would say that until 2 years ago, it would be nonsense to use smartphones in schools. But now they have changed so much that with their price and their specifications, they are already integrated in daily life. And they have become a radically different tool for learning. Today, we use the smartphone to almost everything, even to identify ourselves, even to say against when we are online, to say, this is me, to prove that we use the telephone for that. If we want to prove that we have a vaccine, we use the smartphone. So the smartphone today is for everything. It's no point in keeping it away from the schools. On the contrary, we must bring it to the school. It is today the only universal personal tool for digital literacies. You can use computers, PCs, and things in schools, but universal tool, the one that people take home and use in the morning, in the evening, in the night, is only the smartphone. Not only for children, but also for adults and the elderly. So my claim is that a school that does not include the smartphone in its practice will be impaired in its ability to be relevant to the world. My claim is that if the school doesn't take the smartphone in its practice, it will become more and more distant from the world. Of course, it requires a lot of work. This requires building a path of cultural appropriation of the smartphone for the pedagogical practices. This is a lot of work. It requires a project to renew the curriculum, to renew school practice, and to renew the pedagogies around the use of smartphones. In some areas, as we know, in some areas of knowledge, such as mathematics, we know that we already have a lot of work done in the use of smartphones in education with a smartphone. For instance, Wolfram, Alpha, we can do lots of things with the smartphone. But in other areas, there is some valuable international work, but there's still a lot of work to do. And in some areas, little has been done in the use of smartphones. So that's a big challenge we have before us. If we want to take the phones into the schools, we must put a lot of years by slowly trying to use the smartphone, incorporate the smartphone in the curriculum. And that's a lot of work. But my claim is that that work needs to be done. Now, pedagogical transformation. We know that the mission of the school has broadened greatly in recent years. And today, the school is not just to impart knowledge, but it's also to develop competencies. And it also has the challenge of generating a dynamics that extends from face-to-face to online. We cannot imagine today, since the times of the pandemic, a school that is unable to extend online. Of course, the schools must live in the presence, but they must be able to permanently extend online whenever necessary. And the other difficult for schools today is that it also requires a growing intimacy with by the teachers with increasingly advanced technologies, and requires their adaptability to complexity and uncertainty of the times and to the different geometries of using time and presence and online this is a lot of things that the teachers, our teachers, are not prepared to handle in our days. So most teachers are not prepared to perform these functions, and this represents a big pedagogical challenge, because they must be able to adapt to the evolution of technologies, and above all, they must master what I call, and have been calling for some years now, the new generation pedagogies. And I'm going to introduce you to what I call the new, I'm making a map. I developed this as a mind map, but then I simplified it. And this is a very simplified map of my very complex mind map, where I collected the improvements in pedagogies in the last 40 years. This is a map, and we are going to try to look into the map. And the map has basically 6 big groups of pedagogies. Pedagogies of explanation, of empowerment, of project, of socialization, of drill, and of exploration. And I'm going to describe very quickly this, again, this flower. So I'm going to develop each one of those, the petals of this flower. Let's start with the pedagogies of explanation. First of all, the tradition lecture. The tradition lecture is clearly a pedagogy of explanation, but there are others. There are also the narrative pedagogies, which are becoming very popular to teach some subjects, which is the ones which are based on different varieties of storytelling. Then we have the pedagogies of empowerment. We have today all the pedagogies of dialogue, and they are being developed. There's a lot of very exciting research about the pedagogies of dialogue. We have the performative pedagogies. We have the blended pedagogies, all the varieties of blended learning. We have the flipped pedagogies, all varieties of flipped learning. We have the case study pedagogies, all varieties of case study learning. And these are clearly strong examples of pedagogies of empowerment. We also have game-based pedagogies, a lot of them, which also belong to the petal of empowerment. And in some places, they are experimenting with and researching another kind, which is the pedagogies of adversity. Now, the projective pedagogies, or pedagogies of project. We have project-based learning, or project-based pedagogies. We have problem-based learning. We have design thinking pedagogies. We have maker pedagogies, where we use those maker spaces and all those approaches to learning. Now, pedagogies of socialization. We have the pedagogies of community. We have social networking pedagogies. We have role model pedagogies. We have pedagogies of collective intelligence. We have pedagogies of co-learning. We have pedagogies of co-evolution. And all these are examples of pedagogies of socialization. Of course, the most prominent now is the ones that use social networks. Now, the drill pedagogies. We have the pedagogies of intellectual repetition and the pedagogies of memorization. These are pedagogies that result from the repetition. We used to have a bad idea about pedagogies of a repetition, but in many cases, repetition is essential. As it is, for instance, for an athlete to become an Olympic athlete, he or she must repeat. So there are lots of things that can only be learned by repeating. And we must start to be able to decide when to use drill pedagogies. And then we have what I call the exploratory pedagogies. The pedagogies of simulation and the pedagogies of discovery, which is the ones inspired by the work of scientists. So this is a simplified version of my map of new generation pedagogies. Now, what I wanted to point out is that what do you use today most of the time? So I say 90%, 80% of the time, we use the traditional lecture. What about those? We rarely use them. That's a whole world, especially if we look on the right side. On the right side of this map, all this has been the object of very prominent research. We don't have much to discover in that area. It has been researched very deeply. All those pedagogies of empowerment have been known for a lot of time, but now with technologies, we can take them to their better use. All those projective pedagogies are today very deeply researched, but we are using them very little, we are not using them often enough. And today with technologies, we can use them. The pedagogies of socialization. So this is the big part of the iceberg, and we are not using it. So this area is undervalued or ignored. So I invite you to look at this map and to realize what we have been missing. We have been playing most of the time with that little corner on the left, and we have been ignoring that huge universe of pedagogies that we could be using in our schools. So I think that's the challenge we have before us from the point of view of pedagogy. So I come to the conclusions. And my conclusion is that we live in a world of uncertainty and of digital transformation. Some people believe that to adapt to this world, we need to embrace a digital transformation of the schools. What I contend is that that's not what we need to do. What I claim is that we need to transform the schools in human schools. There's the digital out there. We want our students to take profit of that digital, to take care with that digital, and for that we need a school that is more human. So, of course, the digital technologies have a very important role to play in schools, but they don't make sense if they are used in a cultural and pedagogical vacuum. So we must use the technologies, of course, but we must use them as part of a cultural transformation and of a pedagogical transformation. A cultural transformation that can be obtained, in my view, or can be sparked at least by launching an ambitious project for the regular use of smartphones in education. And the pedagogical transformation that is able to develop the pedagogical skills of the teachers so that they can learn new generation pedagogies. And that was, in essence, my presentation. I'm sorry I went too fast because I was really having trouble with the slides. First of all, I could only see them on my right screen. It wouldn't work on my main screen, and it wasn't working sometimes. So it was, anyway, to sort of recover from this, I suggest that I will put those slides. I will put those slides online. They are not online yet, but I will put them on ResearchGate, and and then you can check them from the beginning, which you were enabled to do during this presentation. Thank you for your attention, and now looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. It was a very insightful presentation of key challenges we face. You hit on a lot of points that are really, there is a lot of room for discussion. So we open the floor now. So to any of our colleagues who would like to ask a question or comment, you can do it in the chat box. And we can transfer it. I don't know if we can allow people to use their mics since we are not a lot of people.
We can, Charalambos. Since it's not been a huge audience, we have been using the chat.
So whoever wants to talk, just unmute your mic and talk.
Okay, can I ask the first question?
Please, go ahead.
All right, Professor Figueiredo.
Yes.
You are suggesting that educational materials should be moved to the smartphone. All right, now, what are the physical and visual constraints that young students may have if a high percentage of the materials on such small devices, little screens are there? Isn't that a physical problem for them to be using? Because typically the kids only use the 2 digits here.
Yes.
And they have to look all the time, concentrate on that screen. So what are the challenges for that?
There are lots of challenges. So it's by no means an ideal solution. There are no ideal solutions. But they are the only solution that integrates seamlessly in their culture. Because as we see, they use them for everyday life. I have been observing my grandsons using the mobile phone, and they can use them for very sophisticated things. Of course, that does not exclude the portable computer. It doesn't exclude the desktop. But if we want a tool where we can work most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the tool is the smartphone. What the kind of smartphone I'm talking about, it's a smartphone. It's not any smartphone. It's a smartphone that has some 6.5-inch screen, and that has at least 256 gig of memory. But they are sold now for $250, $200, and in big quantities they can be bought for half of the price. So, as I say, this is not the only solution, but that's the only one, in my view, that can be used to really bring to the school a tool that can be used for everyone, and that a tool that offers a way of solving the difficulty of sharing, putting the children sharing with each other. I don't know if I managed to answer.
No, I understand. And I don't disagree with you. My only concern is that the size of the phone, and because the kids are always on the phone, that it may be a distraction sometimes in the classes if the class is not managed properly. Because the kids, they're very smart. They're smarter than the smartphone. And they can actually do a lot of other things that are not related to the class, unless there is a good management. But my problem, or the way I see this, is that there is a physical movement all the time, and that can create some physical problems in the health of the children, in the movement of the fingers all the time, and also the sight, because they have to concentrate on that small screen, even as big as you can mention, the 6-inch. But that's still a problem. I mean, if you focus on a screen like that all day long, that creates a problem, in my opinion.
Well, that's an important point, because you remember, I don't know how much did you experience that, of going 100% online. in the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happened is that, as we know, in most schools wanted to be online all the time, which is really very anti-pedagogical.
Of course.
I had to write a lot of articles saying, keep them away from the screens. Only use the screens when they are required, because the work doesn't need to be done looking at a screen. You use the screen to get this or that, to search this or that, to compute this operation. But don't let them spend their time looking at screens. There's no point in putting in practice a use of the smartphone that keeps them looking at the screens. I've been using, for instance, Wolfram Alpha. I can transpose matrices. I can solve systems of equations with my phone. I can trace curves. But I do it, I get my results, and then I work on a piece of paper, or I talk with people. So they don't need to be looking at the phone all the time. They just need to compute a thing, check this, ask this. So what I claim is that they should use the phone, but not keep looking at the phone all the time.
So basically what we're saying is we need to train teachers so that they can do the management of the class in an effective way using the phone.
Yeah, that's it. And it's going to be very different. So they must really make a big change, because it's a big challenge, as it was, as we know, for the use of online. Unfortunately, they had to be sort of conditioned to using online. But now we have time to teach them, and that's why I say pedagogy is so important, because we must teach them to adapt to this incorporation and go along with it.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. Other colleagues who would like to ask a question or comment?
Maria João and Marco put a question on the chat. Maybe they want to.
Okay.
Make an intervention.
Shall I read? Or...
About inclusion. Maria João, is it the one about inclusion?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah, well,
It's hard.
That's a key question. In fact, I picked up this subversive approach because we all understand that using the phone in the classroom is a very subversive approach. But I picked it up because I was very concerned about the problem of inclusion and inequality. You are talking about the inclusion of people with disabilities or
No, not inclusion of students with disability.
Inclusion
of different economical level.
Okay. That was one of my key concerns, because I used to look at my grandsons and see them talking between each other and with their friends. And I tended to be shocked, thinking, what about a child that doesn't have the money to have a phone like this? How is this child going to be able to compete in the future with someone who uses a phone at home and is taught by his parents or her parents? And the solution is to teach them to be as good as the others with a phone. And there's another problem to the inclusion, because if we don't teach them to use the phone like the rich children in their class, they will be left behind. But they will be very, very seriously left behind. So we must teach them to use the phone as the smartphone as well as their rich colleagues. Then there is also the problem of the dangerous uses of the internet. Someone who doesn't know how to use the internet, will be much more exposed to danger. So those children who don't use enough the smartphone don't know how about or know very little about cybercrime. We should be teaching them cybercrime by projecting PowerPoints. If we want the children to learn about cybercrime, we must show them how to fight it with their instruments, their own instruments, not projecting PowerPoints to tell them how to take care about cybercrime. So I looked into that in the great detail, and I realized that one of the more important ways of fighting the lack of inclusion is to put the smartphone in schools. Another example that and I think it's an important point, I've been looking very closely at it. It is the point about what happened in Africa during the pandemic.
Okay.
Now, in South Africa, the University of South Africa has now developed in that period a population of 400,000 online students with smartphones, most of them with just smartphones. In South Africa, in Malawi, in Zambia, in various African countries, they made a partnership supported by UNESCO. They made a partnership with the big operator companies. So in each village, there is a tower, a data tower for them to communicate. It's one. So they don't need to use Wi-Fi in the school, which sometimes has a lot of problems. No, they get data on their phones because there is a tower in their village broadcasting the communication. So this is in Africa. This is the most, in some cases, the poorest people in the world are learning with smartphones. So I think this is a very expressive example.
Yes, but I don't think that we can generalize because, for instance, I know the Angolan context, and what happens is that during COVID, the schools just closed. Maybe in higher education, they have adopted, they were able to cope with the challenge that we all faced, but not in secondary and in primary schools, generally speaking, I think. I know the reality of the Portuguese speaking countries, the others not so much. And I think that they closed the schools. So the children were left behind. And another concern that I have, and I've been posting in Facebook several communicates about that. I have doubts about the use of smartphones and technology for everything. What is happening is that we are in from the culturally speaking, we became the majority of the peoples that are running all the time, don't have time to socialize presence. They socialize maybe a lot, and I don't know if we can say socialize using Facebook. I don't remember what the young people use now, but it's another social network. But what we see when we arrive in a restaurant is, or when we go in the streets, is everybody is looking to their smartphones and don't rely about what is happening around physically. And I think that we must be very critical about the use of technologies. Maybe they have facilitated some of our what we have to do, but I think it's too much. We don't have time to think. You are already retired, so you have much more time than us, than me, for instance. I'm arriving to your position because in 3 years I'm out. But I think that we need to think. I think that is it really necessary to have a smartphone to arose our garden? I don't think so.
Well, I have a list of the uses of smartphone. Today, it's even used to diagnose skin cancer, some kinds of skin cancer. A child can use the smartphone to diagnose the skin cancer in some member of her family. The smartphones can be used today as for everything. So I don't think we should miss this possibility of giving, especially with poor students, the ways of letting them be as good as the others. Now, about the primitive uses you are describing, I agree that our children are using smartphones in very stupid way. They're not using them for Facebook, by the way. They don't use Facebook. They hate Facebook. They use it in other environments, but not with Facebook. But they in fact they have very, very primitive and immature uses of smartphone, and that's why do they do that? Because they don't need to use a smartphone for real things, for serious things, to progress in their school. Because if they needed to use use their smartphone to compute, to find words, to speak a language, to solve a problem in the classroom, instead of just playing with their friends, they would grow up. They would start using really mature forms of exploration of the smartphone. If we don't take the smartphone to the school, they will continue to use the smartphone just as a sort of a silly way of spending time and doing silly things. So I think that's a good reason. The fact that they are being very naive and superficial in the use of computers is a good reason for them to use the smartphones as professionals of the future.
Okay.
That's of course.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes. If there is any other colleague who would like to ask a question or comment.
Ray has.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now you can hear me, I'm sure. Professor, thank you. I had one point about your flower of pedagogies. Could you maybe go back in your slides to that?
Yes, I have had so many difficulties that I hope I can go back. Yes, it's going back. No, I must share.
It's still sharing.
It's still sharing.
Still
It's still
viewing
sharing.
it, Professor. Okay.
Yeah.
Now
Okay. That's that. Yeah, that one's perfect. Because you were talking about the traditional lecture being overvalued, which you highlighted in pink, and then you highlighted the rest of them in green. That suggests to me that your concept of traditional lecture excludes all of these other ones. Whereas for me, I mean, I'm 48 now, so you were talking about the last 40 years in your case. For me, the concept of a traditional lecture already includes some of the other ones that you've listed here. So I would kind of say that yeah, it stuck out for me when you said that traditional lecture doesn't include all of these, or at least that's what's suggested by it. Was that on purpose, or do you have a different opinion on that?
No, I agree with you, and I thank you very much for posing the question, because there's something I missed in this explanation. In fact, I love the traditional lecture, and I think there's a lot of room for the traditional lecture. Sometimes the traditional lecture, I would say that traditional lecture is the only lecture that changes the life of many people, many children. Sometimes it's something the teacher says in a traditional lecture that is going to change the way a child sees the world. So the traditional lecture is very important. The thing I forgot to tell is that all those things overlap. So all of them overlap. The traditional lecture, for instance, you can take narrative, you can bring stories. In fact, there was a course I taught for some years where a very sophisticated technical course. It was in information systems. On this course, to illustrate the course, I presented along the year some 700 stories, because it's small cases, small 5-line, 6-line cases that describe the company with this or that problem. So I was telling stories in the traditional lecture, okay? But of course, from the traditional lecture, I can then involve them in a project-based project-based project, for instance. So I'm talking about these things working together, overlap. Many of them overlap. Most of the time they can be overlapped. For instance, case study pedagogies. They have been around for more than 100 years. We know that they started being used by Harvard School of Management some more than 100 years ago. But today we can use very powerful cases and combine them, for instance, with the flipped pedagogies. Because if we flip a class, or if we flip a course and really give cases that go home and study for them to discuss later on or for do some work, we are overlapping those pedagogies. So I assume that the people who start using those pedagogies will be able to overlap them as required during their use. And of course, there's a lot of place for the traditional lecture. I agree with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, Marco also raised his hand.
Please.
Okay, I think I can put my question now. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for the brilliant presentation and reflection that you provide, Professor António Figueiredo. My question is that we know that, especially in Portugal, that the penetration rate of mobile phones has been exponential in the last decade, but excludes those kids under 14 years old of age. So the pointed BOD, and bring your own device solution, is indeed smart. But how can we implement smartphone use in the elementary school with youngest kids?
Well, in my vision of this use of the smartphone, I am assuming that we would have a significant amount of money to make that change. In fact, I believe, and I already draft something about this. I mean, I believe this conversion of education for the smartphone would be a huge project, which would take a lot of years and would engage hundreds of teachers. In fact, many PhDs could be done by exploring the uses of the smartphone in regular classes. And that also includes elementary schools. But I insist that the smartphone is something that is used, but not all the time, just as little as possible. But it is by the side to be used as people use it in everyday life. So that's one of the problems. The other one is, how can we make sure that all the children have smartphones? Now, what I claim is that all children should have smartphones. Now, in Portugal, we are buying one computer, one PC or for each child. And that's going to cost some hundreds of millions of euros. What I proposed is that we buy good smartphones for all the children, because if we buy them in quantity, they would cost much less. As I say, a good phone in big quantities would cost less than 100 euros. So for the children in a country, that would not be too much. So we would have the children with the smartphones, all the children with smartphones, but we would make sure, if the teachers were properly trained, make sure that the smartphones would be used only if necessary, because they would keep doing the things, traditional things, their drawings, their little things, which has been proved so pedagogical, and only use the smartphone when necessary. I don't know if this answers your question.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Do we have time, Anna, or?
There's a question on the chat from Carla. If they don't have a smartphone, how am I going to teach them how to use it?
They must have a smartphone. My claim is that if this project is, if this vision is going to work, all the students must have a smartphone. So that would be a change, because nowadays in Portugal, some 90% or 91% have a smartphone. That should go up to, and most of them are not good enough. I would expect 100% of them to have smartphones. Often.
Of course, but they don't have them, and when they have them, they don't work well enough.
Well, let me just, that's a big problem, because when we discuss, I understand that, Anna, it's an interesting question, because what I'm proposing is not a solution of the problems this year or next year. I'm proposing a solution for the problems of the future. Most of the problems I envisage in this proposal are not in next day. So there's no point in having them trying the use of smartphones without having a smartphone. And I give you another example. Now in schools, we have a lot of money has already been spent in Portugal to put portable computers in the schools and to give internet access. And we all know that in many schools, they are not able to get any access to the internet, or they have very, very poor access to the internet.
That's true. They have the computer, but they won't take it to class. But
why don't they have? Why don't they have access to the internet? Because most of the schools are prepared to have Wi-Fi, but they don't give them access to data.
The Wi-Fi, yeah, the Wi-Fi is too weak to all the students. But I agree with you. They would take the smartphone to school and they would use it better than they use the computer.
And
I think they would prefer to have a smartphone than a computer.
Yeah, and they could choose as the African students. In Africa, most of the time they did use Wi-Fi. They didn't have Wi-Fi. They had just access to the telephone line, to the telephone network, to data. They had a tower in their village. So if we give to the students, of course, this also requires a partnership with the operators, because otherwise it may be complex. But we are going to spend 500 million euros with education. Won't we be able to get something done in this direction, to have at least proper access to the internet, both using a Wi-Fi and using telephone data?
If I may, can I add something here?
Yes, please.
You know, when we're talking about smartphones, we're talking about current technology. If we talked about this about 15 years ago, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
No.
Because the phones did not exist. It was a disruptive technology that came up, and one of the previous speakers talked about the disruptive technologies. And we don't really know what's coming up, although we have a hint. But let's say, for example, something that could happen is that we could have a development in the technology in the real life of the holograms. And if you are thinking about holography, the holography would be a technology that would allow the speaker or the guest speaker or the astronaut who may be traveling to Mars to project himself or herself in a classroom or in a home, and where they could actually talk to each student and the students can talk to them. We have seen examples of this holography even in amusement parks. So I think that we are just in the process of moving into a direction of another technology that we don't have yet. But as you all know, these technologies have rapidly advanced and allowed us to use a lot of things that we couldn't think about 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's keep that in mind, that things are changing.
I agree with you. In fact, when I talk about a smartphone, I'm talking about a physical thing we know today, but I accept that probably within 5 years, the smartphone will not be at all like it is now. Will have changed a lot. In fact, we are already watching big changes in the physical configuration of the smartphone. But yeah. I'm not very concerned about that, because what we won't be losing is functionalities. We will always want the same functionalities plus more functionalities.
That is correct. That is correct, and I agree with you. And as an example of that, you have the Google glasses.
Yeah.
Well, now Ray-Ban, the company that makes glasses, is already selling glasses that have cameras built in. And pretty soon you will have the technology that you're talking about in the smartphone right there in the glasses. Yeah. And that will be all you need. You won't need a phone, you just need glasses. They already exist. So this is a development, and this is going to continue occurring. This is not the end.
That's fine, because that will be the place where the functionalities of the smartphone will migrate.
Exactly.
But we are preparing them for a functionality. We are not preparing them for a physical object.
Exactly, and that should be the point, right there.
Functionalities migrate to the glasses. That's fine, because the functionalities will be the same, or some better ones, but they will be very similar. So I'm happy with that.
Very good. Well, that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you all. Any last comments? Hello. Yes. All right. So I think we came and planned. It was really a privilege and an honor to facilitate this conversation. Thank you, Professor, for the very insightful ideas you presented, very provocative.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting discussion. It's very challenging to integrate mobile phones in all schools, but it's definitely something that is the direction of the future. We would like to thank ICEM and the School of Education at the Pedagogics of ICEM. I'll give you the link so that you can visit the site in case you do not have here in the chat. And also, you are also invited to attend the conference in 2022. Check the ICEM website, which is this. I'm giving you the link here in the chat for our next conference. And thank you all for the conversations and the attendance and participation.
It was a pleasure. I'm going to put the slides online now. So
Thank you.
that within 10 minutes, they will be there. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you, Professor.
Discussion.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Professor.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you all for coming once again.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Obrigada, professor, uma vez mais.
Obrigado.
Obrigada.